So Urg Spawn of Turg is 2 black and 1 green for a star 5 frog beast. It has Urg Spawn of Turg power is equal to the number of land cards in your graveyard. It also has, at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. You may put that card into your graveyard. Then you can also pay 1 black and 1 green, sacrifice a land, you gain 2 life. So this guy has a really big butt, which makes him pretty strong against aggressive decks. Also, his last ability is also good against aggressive decks, the gaining the 2. Let's say you're flooding out, then this actually gives you something you can do against aggressive decks, and gaining the 2 life is actually pretty good. And when you're doing that, you're putting lands into the graveyard, making this guy bigger. Also, let's say your opponent has lethal. Instead of losing the game, you can sacrifice a land and live. I also like the middle ability because it not only gives you card selection, but it also can put lands into the grave, making this guy bigger. So the lands that work really well with this creature is number 1, Evolving Wilds. Evolving Wilds is fine, and it's pretty good with the frog because you need 2 black and 2 green, so you need mana fixing. So I like this card in there. And then the other cards that are really good with this guy are the channel lands because they go into the grave buffing. So that could be pretty interesting. So yeah, I think this card might see some play. It's not bad. I really like how they pushed it, giving it 5 toughness. So yeah, good card. Sprouting Goblin is 1 and 1 red for a 2/2 Goblin Druid. It has kicker 1 green. When Sprouting Goblin enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, search your library for a land card with a basic land type, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle. You can also pay 1 red, tap, sacrifice a land, draw a card. So it's interesting to point out that this card can get triomes. So if you're in a domain deck, you might want to run this just to get the perfect land so that your domain works really well. And then late game, when you have too many lands and not enough card draw, this guy can do a bit of card draw. But it seems a bit slow for the aggressive domain decks. I think they have better 2-drops and 3-drops that will have a bigger impact on the board than this, but interesting card for sure. So Vohar Voldoin Desecrator is 1 blue and 1 black for a 1/2 legendary creature Phyrexian Merfolk Wizard. It has draw a card, then discard a card. If you discard an instant or sorcery card this way, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. You can pay 2 mana, sacrifice this creature. You may cast target instant or sorcery card from your graveyard this turn. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile it instead. Activate only as a sorcery. This guy seems pretty pushed for an uncommon. I like the draw, discard, and gain life. I think that's pretty useful, and then when you really need a spell, you can sacrifice it. It's really not a bad 2-drop in like a control deck. Elas Ilkora Sadistic Pilgrim is 1 white and 1 black for a 2/2 Phyrexian Core Cleric with Death Touch. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. Whenever another creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life. So this guy's basically a mini Meathook Massacre. I still think Meathook Massacre is a stronger card because it can't die to removal, first of all. Well, creature removal. And the X minus X is way stronger. It's going to kill a lot more things. It's going to trigger your last 2 abilities. But it's interesting in like an aristocrats black-white deck. It really depends how many triggers you can get from him. But he's also just a 2 mana 2/2 Death Touch, which is a pretty good blocker against like big creature decks. So yeah, I think this card is decent. Terra Sunder is 1 and 1 green for an instant with kicker, 1 and 1 black. Exile target artifact or enchantment. If that spell was kicked, exile target non-land permanent instead. I think this card's crazy flexible. You might run into the right matchup where this is very important, but if you're not in an artifact or enchantment matchup, the kicker makes it really strong because now you can hit creatures and you can hit planeswalkers. So this will hit something in pretty much every matchup, except maybe if there's like an instant speed control deck. But it also exiles, which is pretty insane. So yeah, I like this card. It's a good card. Voldalian Hexcatcher is 1/1 blue for a 1/1 Merfolk Wizard. It has Flash. Other Merfolks you control get +1/+1. And sacrifice a Merfolk, counter target non-creature spell unless its controller pays 1. Flash on this card is really good with both abilities. The first one, if you, let's say you're attacking a bunch of Merfolk and they're blocking, you flash this in, give all the creatures +1/+1, and then maybe the blocking is better on your side. Also, you flash this in, you sacrifice it, you counter a non-creature spell, which would be pretty good. So yeah, I think this card is going to see play in the Merfolk deck, but I don't think in Standard there's enough Merfolks for this to work. Thran Portal is a land that is a gate. It has Thran Portals enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or fewer other lands. As Thran Portal enters the battlefield, choose a basic land type. Thran Portal is the chosen land type in addition to its other types. Mana abilities of Thran Portal cost an additional 1 life to activate. So I really like the fact that it is a gate, that they're still printing gates even though Ravnica is long gone and there's no gate synergy. But what I really like about this card is that it becomes any land type you want. So in a domain deck, you can get the last color you need to have domain 100%. So yeah, I think I don't like the 1 life, because if you're playing this in a control deck, losing the 1 life is a lot. But if you're playing this in an aggressive deck, which you kind of want to because of the first ability, you don't really care about losing 1 life if you're the aggressor. So I think this card will see play in the domain strategy, but I don't think anywhere else. Baltimore Battlemage Captain is 1 blue and 1 red for a flying 1/3 bird wizard. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain trample until end of turn. If you have a really wide board and a ton of instants and sorceries, this card gets completely insane. The problem is that it kind of splits your deck. You want to play a lot of creatures, but you also want to play a lot of spells. So getting the right amount of each is pretty important, and I don't know if it's going to make it, but if it does, this card will definitely be very strong. Leyline Binding is 5 any color and 1 white for an enchantment with flash. Domain. This spell costs 1 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. It has, when Leyline Binding enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanents an opponent controls until Leyline Binding leaves the battlefield. So let's say you have 1 triumph. This becomes a Bardo time with flash. But in a domain deck, it won't be that hard to get 5 of different land types. And that becomes 1 mana flash, exile target permanents an opponent controls until it leaves, which is pretty crazy. The problem with this card, I think, is that Bousseiju exists. But I still think over that, it's still very strong in a domain control deck. Electrostatic Infantry is 1 and 1 red for a 1/2 dwarf wizard with trample. Whenever you cast an instant or sorcery spell, put a 1/1 counter on Electrostatic Infantry. So there seems to be a deck that wants to run a bunch of creatures that synergize with spells. So far they have Haughty Djinn and Baltimore Battlemage Captain. All these cards are really good with a bunch of spells, and I think this guy's especially, because trample is very important on this, and also it'll get really big if you're casting a lot of spells. So yeah, I think this is a good 2-drop for the deck, and hopefully this spell slinger strategy works out because it's pretty cool. Tailswipe is a 1 mana instant that says, choose target creature you control and target creature you don't control. If you cast this spell during your main phase, the creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn, then those creatures fight each other. So let's say they double block. You can play this card at instant speed, kill one of the blockers. Now, they don't have enough power to kill your creature, so your creature kills that one, and it's a blowout. It's also really good if on your turn they don't have a creature, and then you wait until they play a creature on their next turn so you can instant speed kill it. But the +1/+1 is also really good to make sure you get over the creature you want to fight. So yeah, I don't think this is as strong as Blizzard Brawl, but I still think it's a very powerful. Jodath the Unifier is 1 of every color for legendary 5/5 human wizard. He gives legendary creatures you control get +X/+X, where X is the number of legendary creatures you control. Whenever you cast a legendary spell from your hand, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a legendary non-land card with lesser mana value. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I've been neglecting the legendary tribal cards because I thought they weren't going to have enough to make a whole strategy around it. But this card might change my mind. So let's say when you play this, you have 3 legendary creatures. They all get +4/+4 when he comes in, making him a 9/9, and then you swing in, and that's probably game. But let's say you don't win. Now that he's in play, every legendary creature you get gets another one. that means you're going to even get more pumps from the first ability. I also like if you're playing 5 colors, you can have like a side domain theme just to fill in your curve. So yeah, I think this card gets pretty crazy, and I'm very excited to see if legendary decks will be a thing. Knight of Dawn's Light is 1 in a white for a 2/2 human knight with first strike. If you gain life, you gain that much life plus 1 instead. You can pay 2 mana. Knights of Dawnlight gets +1/+1 until end of turn. So if you forget the middle ability, this card's still pretty good. You attack with it. Your opponent won't want to block it because you could pump it and first strike kill it. So it makes them really scared of the card. But in a life gain deck, he might gain you a lot of life depending how many triggers you have, because it's not a once per turn thing. So he could be pretty good in like a life gain mid range deck. But yeah, I think this card's decent. It has potential, but it's not like broken or anything. So the weatherseat treaty is 2 of any color and 1 green for an enchantment with read ahead. So you can choose what chapter you start on. Chapter 1, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped. Chapter 2, create a 1/1 sapling creature token. Chapter 3, target creature you control gets +X/+X and gains trample until end of turn, where X is the number of basic land types among lands you control. So in an aggressive deck, I think this has 2 modes. The first one, you go in Chapter 1, you search library for basic land, you make sure you have domain, and if you're playing an aggressive deck, that'll pump your creatures. And then you go for the full value, you get the 1/1, and then you get the last ability. I think the Chapter 2 getting the 1/1 is the worst chapter, easily. I would almost never choose to start on Chapter 2. But if you choose to start on Chapter 3, you probably have all the lands you need, so giving a creature +5/+5 and trample is pretty strong. So I think this card's interesting. It's not crazy strong, but it might see some play in some aggressive domain decks. So yeah, those are all the cards that came out today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. It's very important at this stage because I'm just starting. And hello to the only 2 people that are going to see this video. Thank you so much. Bye.